Every summer, the worlds of science fiction and fantasy come together to recognize some of the best books and stories of the previous year. And the finalists for one of the most prestigious of these honors for science fiction and fantasy for 2025 sound pretty amazing. We're going to take a look at each of these books in turn, so please join the conversation. Hey everybody, welcome to D3 Reads. I'm Eric, and today we're talking new fantasy and science fiction. When we established this channel last year, if we had kind of a guiding principle for our TBR, it was to read and review and discuss on this channel the classics of fantasy, science fiction, horror, and that's what we largely did. But if we've got a guiding principle for 2025, I think it is to do that whenever we can, but also to read new books, books that are either by new authors or by established authors, but have been recently published. And so that's what we've been doing. And so to that end, what I'm doing is I'm paying close attention to the awards that are given for the various genres out there to see, the types of books that I may have not noticed before, and to share them with you so that maybe I can clue you in on some books that are out there that you might not have read. So you may have noticed I have a couple of videos recently I published on the Bram Stoker Awards that seeks to honor new books dealing with horror. Well, in science fiction and fantasy, there are a number of awards given for best sci-fi and fantasy. And two of arguably the most prestigious of those are the Hugo Awards and the Nebula Awards. Now, the Hugo Awards are managed by a group called the World Science Fiction Convention, Worldcon, and they seek to honor science fiction and fantasy books that have been written and published anywhere in the world over the past year. The thing is that the Hugo Awards don't seem to have a finalist list. And that's kind of that's the tool that I use with the Bram Stoker Awards to narrow down the books that I want to try to read and try to get that read before, they announce the awards. So I couldn't really do the Hugo Awards like I wanted to, but the Nebula Awards, however, that's a little bit different. The Nebula Awards are managed by the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, and they seek to honor the science fiction and fantasy books of the last year that were published in the United States. And they recently, a couple weeks ago, mid-March, released their press release of the finalists for the Nebula Awards for the year. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at the Nebula Award nominees for this year and pick a couple of those to try to read before they announce the winners here in the summer. I think it's in the middle of June or so. With that said, I'm going to start with the first on their list, which is a book called Sleeping Worlds Have No Memory by Yaroslav Barsukov. Now, I haven't read anything by Barsukov, and I haven't read anything by any of the authors on this list, to my shame, so I've got some gaps to fill. But this book immediately grabbed my attention, Sleeping Worlds Have No Memory. It sounds like a mix of science fiction and fantasy. Matter of fact, the description on Goodreads calls it a unique blend of science fiction, fantasy, and noir. So that immediately sounds pretty darn cool. But the plot of this sounds complex and thought-provoking. The main character is a government minister of some sort named Shia Ashcroft, and at some point he is ordered by the queen that he serves in this world to gas these protesters. And I guess he refuses, and so he gets banished. And he's banished to this borderland where he is tasked with creating this defensive tower, with building this tower and overseeing it. And this tower is supposedly one of the biggest in history, but because of advanced technologies and instability in the area and various factors like that, building this tower is considered extremely dangerous, and now he's got to figure out how to succeed in the mission he's given all sorts of complicating factors. The book sounds really, really intriguing. I love just the fresh take on fantasy with this blending of sci-fi, fantasy, and noir. So I've immediately added this to my TBR list, and I will let you know, hopefully before June, how this book is. But if you've read it, let me know. If you've read any of these books that we're going to be talking about, let me know, because I can't read them all. And we need a little bit of help prioritizing which ones to read. Next on the list is Rakesfall by Vajra Chandrasekhara. Chandrasekhara is not new to the Nebula Awards. In 2023, The Saint of Bright Doors won Best Novel. This takes a really interesting take. It's a science fiction book, and it involves two characters named Annelid and Leveret. And I'm not sure by the description if they're friends, if they're lovers, if they're one and then the other, or what. But somehow in a haunted wood, in a post-war kind of environment, they are somehow bound to each other for eternity. And what is described here is essentially reincarnation. And so these characters are bound together and face a variety of obstacles and adversaries throughout the course of numerous lives, and yet they can't be torn asunder. So the science fiction mixing with reincarnation sounds pretty cool, but there's also in this story something they call the Witches of the Red Web, and they swear that every throne will fall, according to this description. So the book sounds interesting. Let me know what you think if you've read either Rakesfall or The Saint of Bright Doors. And let me know if you think this should be on the short list for the TBR going into the summer. Next on the list is Asunder by Kirsten Hall. It's a fantasy book, and again, it just sounds super creative and really, really interesting. The main character in this story is Karis Eska, and she's what they call a death speaker. And somehow she becomes involved with this creature called Sabaster, who's an eldritch entity, three-faced, 100-winged, and unforgiving. And this creature gives Karis the ability to speak to the recently dead. Now, she uses this power almost, I guess, like a detective. She says that she uses these abilities to investigate suspicious deaths around the city that she lives in. And so eventually a client comes along who pays her to help him with some issue or what have you. And somehow or another, the main character, Karis, inadvertently binds him to her shadow. And so they're kind of connected in that respect. So in order to survive, they have to learn how to work together. And this prompts some kind of journey into the heart of what's called a fated empire, while they're being hounded by whatever horrors that are involved with this death speaking. So the plot sounds interesting, and kind of, I just finished a couple of weeks ago doing some tech noir type reviews, and this kind of somehow calls to mind some of those noir type storylines. So I kind of wonder if that might be worth exploring. So if you've read anything by Kirsten Hall, I think this is her first book that's nominated for Nebula. But if you're familiar with her work, or if you've read Asunder, let me know if it's worth reading. Okay, next is another fantasy book called A Sorceress Comes to Call, and it's written by T. Kingfisher. Now, Kingfisher is the pen name of Ursula Vernon, and Kingfisher, I haven't read any of her books, but her reputation kind of precedes her because I've heard of her and some of her works that, again, I haven't gotten a chance to read, but this one I think might actually bubble up to the top of my list because it sounds pretty cool. A Sorceress Comes to Call is a retelling of a Brothers Grimm story called Goose Girl. Now, I thought I'd read all the Brothers Grimm stories, but it's been many, many years, and I don't remember this one. But her version of this story sounds pretty cool. A young girl named Cordelia lives with her mother, who is evidently a sorceress, and her mother is quite peculiar, has very specific rules, will not allow Cordelia to have any friends at all except for her horse. Well, one day there's a mysterious death in the town nearby where they live, and the mom suddenly decides they got to get out of town. And so she grabs her daughter, jumps on the horse, and they ride off into the countryside until they come across the home of a young man called the Squire, who lives with his sister. And the sister picks up that the mother is up to no good, that she's got some kind of plot going on that probably involves marrying Cordelia off to her brother. And she's out to figure out what's going on and what the deal is between her mother and Cordelia. It sounds pretty, it sounds both kind of like a classic fairy tale, but the description promises a dark kind of retelling of this Brothers Grimm story. And if you've read Brothers Grimm, they can get pretty dark on their own. So this book sounds kind of interesting, sounds kind of fun. So I think this one might bubble up to the top of my list on which of these books I plan on reading. But if you've read A Sorceress Comes to Call, or if you're a fan of T. Kingfisher, let me know and what you think and whether or not this is worth reading. Next up is The Book of Love by Kelly Link. Now, Kelly Link has been nominated several times over the years. She also won in 2001 and 2005, I believe, So she's got a lot of credibility when it comes to writing science fiction and fantasy. And this story just sounds cool. And I don't know, there's something about it that just comes across as sort of Stephen King-ish. There are these three friends, Laura, Daniel, and Mo, who are hanging out in a high school classroom. It says, according to the description, almost a year after disappearing from their hometown, having been presumed dead, which in fact they are. So these friends find themselves in their school, in their high school, apparently dead, and they interact with their music teacher, who apparently there's more to him than just being a music teacher. And this music teacher offers them a deal. They can go back to their lives, but they have to conduct these various magical tasks for whatever ends that the story will eventually unveil as you read it. So they agree to this, but they're not allowed to tell anybody what's happened to them. Well, they go back to their lives, and as they do so, it attracts the attention of other supernatural beings who apparently want in on whatever action it is that they've been roped into by this music teacher. And so soon they find themselves in a race against time to try to, I guess, accomplish their tasks while solving the mystery of their deaths and averting a looming disaster that's apparently facing their community. So the plot sounds really interesting. Again, it sounds, I don't know, for some reason, it just kind of suggests a Stephen King kind of flavor to this fantasy. So I don't know. This one sounds like it might also make my TBR. I don't know how many I can add on to this, but if you've read any of Kelly Link's works or you've read the Book of Love, again, comment and let me know what you think and whether or not it should make the final list of our new fantasy and sci-fi books TBR. And the final book on the list is probably the most bizarre of them all. Now, bear with me. The title is called Someone You Can Build a Nest In. It's written by John Wiswell, who's been nominated several times over the years for various books. And it looks like he won the best short story in 2020. So again, an established writer. The plot of this book is, again, it's quite bizarre. The main character is a monster called, whose name is Shishishin. And here's the description. Shishishin has made a mistake fatal to all monsters. She's fallen in love. Shishishin is an amorphous blob that lives in some ancient manor or something. So Shishishin is a shapeshifter, and she's normally, I guess, an amorphous blob who lives in this mansion. And she gets hunted down. I guess the mansion's invaded by these monster hunters who are intent on killing her. They wind up chasing her out of this mansion, and she gets flung off the side of a cliff, where she gets badly hurt. And then she, as she's trying to, I guess, heal, she is discovered by a human named Homily. Now, Homily takes her in because Shishishin takes on the form of a human. And she's just, I guess, biding her time, but she winds up falling in love with Homily. Now, here's the thing, is falling in love with a human isn't the same thing that, it isn't something that Shishishin is used to, because I guess Shishishin would normally lay eggs inside of the other parent, and then eventually those eggs would hatch and devour the other parent. And, you know, humans aren't really on board with that kind of thing. So she's got to figure out how to love this woman, Homily. Homily on her side is, I guess, hunting the monster that she doesn't realize Shishishin is. And so there's this kind of complex web of love and destiny, I guess, that's playing out here. It sounds like a fantasy / horror / comedy. I honestly, when I read it, I chuckled through the story description, but it kind of overwhelmed me a little bit. I'm not sure that this is on top of my list. But if you've read Someone You Can Build a Nest In or are familiar with John Wiswell at all, let me know what you think, if it's worth the time. Right now, I think I'm leaning toward Sleeping Worlds Have No Memory, Asunder, and A Sorceress Comes to Call for my TBR. But I'd love to hear what you all think. These are the books that have been nominated for Nebula Award in 2025. So if you've read any of them or familiar with any of the authors and want to let us know what you think, please drop a comment. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you around. We are over 540 some odd subscribers now, so I'm grateful for every single one of you. Thank you so much, and enjoy the book.